Kaunas and Derry Londonderry are both second cities, each at an edge of Europe with a contested border, and home to CCA and Kaunas Artist House, two arts organisations and partners, along with the Lithuanian Cultural Institute, in DeMo, a reciprocal residency programme. Welcome to this latest edition of our series of Roundtable podcasts, where we invite artists to have a conversation. I'm Hemelryk, Director of the Centre of Contemporary Art, Derry Londonderry, and I'm joined by artists Mark Buckeridge, Ona Juciūtė, and Hrefna Hörn Leifsdóttir. In February 2022, Mark, based in NI, and Ona, based in Lithuania, each spent time on the other side of Europe, respectively. DeMo is short for Decoding Modernity, and this programme was established with a biennial model to ensure we have dialogue spanning our continent, an opportunity for exchange and experience embedded in our calendar, and this year is part of Kaunas 2022 European Capital of Culture. The first edition took place in 2020, and you can listen to a conversation between the artists in residence, Ginta Regina, Niamh Seána Meehan, with Michael Kirikis in our earlier Roundtable podcast. But today we talk to our 2022 DeMo artists, Mark and Ona, and our guest, Hrefna. We're going to have a conversation about making work, residencies, looking back, viewing the past through materials, what's real, what's imagined, readings and alternative readings of place. But first, a brief introduction to the artists. Mark Buckeridge was born in Dublin and lives and works in Belfast, with a practice encompassing performance, installation, text and sound. Mark studied in Amsterdam with an MFA from the Sandberg Institute and has exhibited across Ireland, the UK and the Netherlands. Ona Juciūtė is based in Vilnius, where she graduated from the Academy of Arts with MA in Sculpture. She's participated in artist residencies internationally, including most recently in Germany, and works across sculpture, installation and moving image. And a fragility and careful manipulation of materials is often apparent in her work. Hrefna Hörn Leifsdóttir was born in Iceland and is currently based in Brussels. She works with sculpture, text and performance and co-runs The Tale, an exhibition space in Brussels. Thank you all for joining us. And thank you to our supporters who made this roundtable possible: the Lithuanian Cultural Institute, Arts Council of Northern Ireland, Derry City and Strabane District Council and the Art Fund. So when I spoke to Mark and Ona about setting up our roundtable, they invited you, Hrefna, to join us, and I think you had a question about that.
Yeah, I mean, I was just a bit surprised, or like I wondered how they had found me. Actually, my first kind of response was that I was just coming from Basel, and I was like, oh my God, was I speaking to someone that I like have forgotten now? Like, who was I talking to? What was I talking about? But yeah, so I was just curious about how they found me and why they wanted to have a conversation.
I think that we just found your practice quite exciting. And no, you didn't speak to us in Basel or nowhere else before now. So we just like found you in the abyss of internet. But yeah, somehow as mine and Mark's practices are quite different from the first glance, but then you seem to interact with kind of both fields in a way. So we thought that it could be really nice to have someone to channel through, but also as we got to know each other quite randomly, this is also the way just to get to know someone. So yeah, something like that.
Cool, it's cool.
So you all use found materials in your sculptural work. Do you find you are drawn to particular materials time and again? And I'd love to hear your different experiences about this. Mark, perhaps you could tell us first of all.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that. Like, I really don't. Like, it's quite a natural thing, I suppose, interacting with materials. It's a very physical thing. It's like listening to music, or when you're writing music, when you like drum sound, you like that particular hard percussion, or you like that bass line that's really nice, and you go with your instinct and your gut and it feels right. So yeah, I just work whatever feels right, really. I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
Well, in the exhibition that you made following the residency, you've got things from your past. So you've got lyrics and set lists, for sort of draft set lists, and a sort of small toy dinosaur. They're all objects from your sort of recent past. So is that something you've done before, or is this new for your current practice?
No, well, I always draw in studio, and I collect a lot of material, whether it's drawings or, make videos and stuff and record sounds. And it's just this layering of materials, I suppose. I haven't really worked with textiles as much as I have in this show, but drawings for sure. And yeah, I would collect objects around from different areas, from secondhand shops and around the place. So they're kind of sitting in studio, and it seemed right to use them within this context and the ideas I was coming up with this show.
Ona, in a very different way, you're using materials that you find around you, but you, rather than presenting them as is, you manipulate them, don't you?
For me, I see all materials that I come across as somehow leftovers of something else, because every item is like an element of something else in a way. I see everything so industrialized. So whenever I'm like a single person not being part of any kind of factory life can come across a material, it's somehow left behind. And everything is an element of something else. Like a screw is a part of the furniture is like, it becomes a room, a house, a street, a village, etc. So when I can touch upon some material, I feel like, okay, it's somehow an outlet in a way, and then I like to find new ways for it, like somehow new existence grounds. But maybe it also comes from my experience, as I come from a family of carpenters, so it's always something, what is the right material that is supposed to become a piece of furniture, and what is like no longer somehow quite usable for that. So then I think that I'm always attracted to neglected materials somehow, and finding somewhat of a new ways, because, as much as a very popular and well-behaved material tells so much about our civilization or the ways we do, it's the same with the materials that do not fit it. Somehow, the discounted colors in a construction store. It's so interesting why like a lime green color is somehow on the 40% off rack. And I find that in my installation, it's always the ones that were somehow discounted, left over, or like, like with the veneers, they were cut-offs of some veneers that were used for the veneers, from the CCA show. So yeah, I think that I see them as somehow leftovers, and that's how I deal with them. Yeah, and not only with raw materials, but also with an items like a secondhand shop or a flea market. Sometimes I'm really interested why these objects didn't make it, and this is how we start together with them. Yeah,
I like this sort of, I don't know, the fatality of it. They didn't make it.
They didn't make it, but yeah, that's so true.
But then they have this new life through your positioning of them, through their interlacing, and so much more.
Sometimes you have this kind of revelations of two completely different materials, but they have something in common, like, a paint and a textile, and they both were on a discounted shelf. And from the first glance, you wouldn't see anything in common, but then you start looking at them or combining them, and they become somehow in this kind of discounted shelter.
Hrefna, do you have a similar approach, or what is your tactic for materials?
I really much agree with what Ona was saying, or relate to what Ona was saying about leftover materials, or like all materials being kind of left or elements of something else. I feel like in the projects that I'm currently doing, I only use these kind of, I only gather material in secondhand shops or buy them online or at markets. Like Brussels has great markets. Like you walk through them and you feel like you're just going through centuries of trash that have probably been at markets, goes to someone's home, been at markets again, there's this whole circulation. So I kind of like that approach to these objects. And the project that I currently have is the end object is a handbag, or is like a usable, wearable object that then someone else will use. So I think it's kind of a fast practice. So I collect all this material quite fast. I assemble them quite fast. It's like almost like fast creative processes. And then I want them to be out again. So it's kind of like I'm gathering, but they don't stay with me. I'm not collecting anything. Like it's more like it's gathering to give out again. And I really also connect with what you were saying, Ona, about like the curiosity about the right and wrong materials. Because you said you come from a family of carpenters, so there's a rule of what is right and what is wrong. Maybe that I understand it right. I think I also went through, I don't come from a family of craftsmen, but I think my mom had very strong opinions on what colors were good and what colors were bad. So light purple and light blue and these colors would be very bad. I had a period in my life where I was very curious about these colors. These would also maybe be discount colors because they no one really likes them except grandmas that are buying something for babies. So I would be like, oh, what's this color? How can I use it? Oh, how exciting, I don't know, did you have this rebellious moments against, or maybe it's in the past or something not against, but regarding your family and your family craft?
Well, my dad he was also a punk carpenter, because my grandfather, he was very much a very well craftsman, and he knew how to do things and they really fit in and he was popular. And my dad, he was making I think he already rebelled, and I'm still on a team dad somehow in this sense. So we both have this kind of strange attraction towards going to a flea market in a countryside of Lithuania and then finding some broken plate and then fixing it. And this kind of thing is, I don't know, it's healing. But also I think that today there are so many objects, so sometimes it's so easy to decide just to take the cheapest one, and to take the one, because if you start choosing, then it's endless. I remember how our neighbors, they painted the house in this really acidic lime green, and my father said, oh my God, I know why they did it, because it was on a discount, this color. And we both agreed that it doesn't matter, the look of the color just helps you decide, because if you need to choose from the 100 of colors, then it becomes a little bit mad sometimes, So sometimes it's just so easy, but yeah, I think that it's somehow, for me, it's the knowledge of civilization. I was in a construction store and I saw that there's a bunch of screws 50% off, and then I understand that they probably don't screw something well, and that's exciting, Then you start to think about this whole system of making up things and how there are so many elements to make something very simple, but you have these machines that it's crazy. When I think about industry, it makes me, I don't know, very curious and scared at the same time. So I guess this is my way of dealing with it, taking some end product and just dismantling it to the moment where I can at least understand it somehow. But tell me more about those bags you make. I'm actually very interested. This kind of how do you make them? Do they come from completely scratch, or do you find a bag and then add something?
And we mostly find the bags. So I work with my friend Annie Ackerman, is her name, also an artist. And we mostly find the bags. We used to, in the beginning, we would find them at flea markets and secondhand stores, but now we moved more online. And then we take them apart, put them back together, and make them into something else than they were in the beginning.
And when you said that you like to bring them back to the streets, to the market, how do you do it? Do you just sell them as bags?
Right now, we've been selling them online, mostly to friends, just through Instagram. So in the beginning, I would think about them as bags, but now we've been invited to exhibit them. So then it's also fun to think about them as more sculptures, or they can be sculptures, like these things. So, and I'm not sure how they will be sold then, because now what we've been doing is selling them quite affordably, because that's what our friends can buy. Yeah, so it's not
funny. And then they can become real statement bags, with the help of art institutions. They can compete with Hermes and things like that. Yeah, because I also think if the bag is a sculpture, or does it have similar qualities to it? In a way it does, like a statement object, like a person says something about it. But I think I am more interested in the fact that it's a bag hides something inside, like an artwork in a way, in this kind of modernistic approach, it has something else than it really brings out from the first glance. So I think it's a very ironic analog to the art world somehow, like a vessel or something. So yeah, I was quite drawn to your bags, actually. It made me laugh and made me curious and all those things.
Leading on from family traits or family skills, Mark, I wanted to ask you, is your family musical? Because music plays such a crucial role in your practice. Where did it start for you?
Yeah, my mum was a music teacher for I think 37 years in an all-girls school, secondary school in Ireland. And I kind of grew up with music in the house, we have a piano and all that kind of stuff. And basically I started learning early on, but then I got in trouble because a teacher said to my mum that Mark wasn't at traditional music lessons. He was out playing football, even though I'm not really a big fan of football anymore. So yeah, I kind of rebelled against it all. I had no interest in it for a while. So then I eventually came back to it, and it seems to be that is this kind of teenage years that's inspired a lot of my interest in aesthetics. So I grew up with it, yeah.
Was it similar for you, Hrefna?
Growing up with music? Not at all. No one in my family has touched that. Yeah, my sister did. She played like a clarinet for some time.
Nice.
We're we don't have a lot of music talent.
There's a performance element to your practice, and what led to you pursuing that route?
I think it started with like other people asking me to perform for them. So it was never really my intention, but I happened to often be the person that wasn't necessarily the first choice, but someone would call me and ask me to be like, oh, Hrefna, we need someone to like do this and this on stage. And I would be like, yeah, sure. Once I was called like, Hrefna, can you jump in a taxi right now? And I was like, okay. And I jumped in a taxi, and then I like was at like the entrance of a boat. And on the boat, it was like part of the outside program of like Berlin Biennale 2016 or something. And I came there on the boat, and it was like 5 minutes before the performance. I was like, okay, this cue comes and you jump on the stage and you have to strangle this person. And I was like, okay. So like, it's just like one thing leading to another. It was almost becoming like my money job was to perform for other people, but I was doing sculptures. And then at some point I just thought like, hey, I actually feel quite comfortable doing this. And I was also writing more and more. So I started to like read my own writing, and kind of like I knew that I didn't have any knowledge about movements. I don't have any choreographical background, but like that's also sometimes where like collaboration comes in good place, or you have conversations or collaborate with other people and understand these things that you're missing. So yeah, it comes maybe something from that. But I was an athlete when I was younger, so I think that maybe helps with like just knowing your body, knowing how to work with it in some sense.
Yeah, it looks like there's a real physicality to your work. So how limbs fit together for starters seems to really fit in. And is there something about the nature of performance that has then informed your sculptural work?
Probably, yeah. I mean, like if I'm doing handbags now that are worn by other people, it must be.
Mark, for you, you have a very deliberate approach to your performances. It's like, right, the performance begins, for example, in CCA when your assistant, which was me in one case, brings you the costume, and that's sort of the starting point of the performance. What is your approach to that? And also, I really want to know more about the style of singing that you used for Four Ballads as well.
Well, in that case, it's quite practical. Like mostly all of the time, it's functional, practical, and with aesthetics involved. In that particular scenario, I didn't really want to be. The costume's quite hard to get on. Like it's, it's quite difficult, and I don't want to be taking off my clothes in front of everyone. From the past, I've learned from bad performances that it becomes part of the performance. So it can really be very staged. So if I'm putting on the costume in front of everyone, it will bring a lot of things up. So that's why it's more simple. And yeah, but what was the other question there?
The style of singing that you use.
Oh yeah,
for ballads.
Yeah, it's a shan nose singing. It's a traditional Irish singing, and it's predominantly, where emotion takes place over skill. And, back in the day, they used to say at parties or when you're having drinks or you're trying to entertain, they would say Aber Auron, which in Irish says it means, tell me a story, tell me a song. Like, so I probably reacted against the work I made in Amsterdam, the opera, which was quite big and there's a lot of music and it's quite overwhelming with the libretto and all that. So I wanted to go back to the very start of just someone with their voice in a room showing emotion to other people. And yeah, it's very democratic. Like, it doesn't cost anything to tell a story or sing a song. So but yeah, I worked with a Irish traditional singer called Dominic Magula Breda for a few months, and I went to his house in North Belfast and I rehearsed with him, learned some Irish songs, and then I wrote my own one in reaction to it. Yeah.
So for anybody who hasn't heard it, it's a series of verses about looking back to your 20s and sort of the incidental things like what shoes people are wearing and different slightly more monumental moments or classically monumental moments. Did you go through a really stringent writing process to get to those, or was it all sort of quite stream of consciousness?
I was like on Google Drive, just writing all the time, particularly in Kaunas in Lithuania, and I met with musicians over there and I wrote one. I was in this, cafes and stuff, but I accumulate a lot of material in general, whether it is like physical material or, digital. But the real work starts when you try to edit all that material. So I had like pages and pages of diaries and like on Google Drive, and I was trying to make sense of it all. And then it's very much about fitting into the sound, and then how long the slurring the words are, or the kind of sharpness of a particular word. So yeah, it's a lot of editing really. So that's how that kind of happens.
I have a question. I was kind of curious about, when I was reading about the show, of this like kind of revisiting the 20s or being in your 30s and looking back at your 20s. Like I'm turning 30 next week, so I've been having a lot of thoughts about just about this like moment in life and like what these changes are. And I've also been seeing a lot of people again that I haven't seen in the pandemic. So like it's maybe been 4 years or something that you're seeing people, and a lot of people are turning 30. So I'm always like watching like what has changed, what is staying the same, like these elements. So I was just wondering what made you go on this path of looking back and not doing it on a personal internal level, but doing it with your as a practice and like sharing it with other people.
Yeah, I think it was kind of, I hadn't really thought about that. When I turned 30, it wasn't a thing for me. I was just like, I feel, better than I did when I was 20, because my identity was I was unsure of myself a lot. I was trying to fit in with a lot of people, but I think one of the few things I'm hopeful about is that this idea of falling apart or not caring anymore about anything, or what clothes I wear, and I know who I am more. But it seems to me that it was a very natural thing. I generally, don't look back at all, and I'm always looking forward. I never have in my practice. And it was kind of like a strange thing to do, and it's quite emotional thing to do, to confront that. And it felt like I was saying goodbye to a certain part of my life, just in the artwork, that I wanted to acknowledge it and say, thank you. I'm very grateful to be still making art, because a lot of my friends haven't got that chance, and I'm very privileged to be able to still do it. And I kind of wanted to capture all that joy of material and sound and photographs that makes me feel alive. And it's just seemed natural, this correlation between materiality and the ready-made objects found, and the lyrics seem to be reflecting it. I think it's also just, it's something that has been thought about in my head a lot, and a lot of the lyrics come from lived experience. And so it's a very reflective time, I think, that I was going through. And I was like, in the lyrics in the first verse, it's about being really in a park, in Vondel Park in Amsterdam, where we were just sitting in a public space, reflecting, and there's no need for production. There's no outcomes that we're doing. We're just sitting there watching the world go by. And I think of that time as a precious time, of just nothing.
Was there something about spending the time on the residency that helped reflection, or was this in brewing anyway?
It didn't when I turned 30, yeah, it didn't. It was, it never came into my head. And then the question is like, why does it become an artwork? And, why can't you just have a conversation with a friend? But it's just what I was feeling at the time, and interested in. And maybe it was the imagery I was attracted to. And I'm very interested in youth and subcultures and music, and that idea of just this rebelliousness and not looking to the future, and maybe that energy I was attracted to, But the Kaunas thing, it was a very distilled a time on my own, so it obviously helped me write a lot.
So you mentioned that you've collaborated and the costume was made by a friend of yours in London. With the collaborations that you do, do they arise through conversation, or is it, I need this thing and I know who can make it?
Yeah, I think it's, again, it's practical. It's like, I need to wear, like, for the context and the conceptuality, I would like a costume for this show. And then I'm like, who can I work with and who do I find interesting and their energy really interesting and I want to be around. And my friend Rory in London is a good friend of mine going back a long time. And he's never made a costume in his life. But it wasn't, I knew his energy was right. And I think that's important for me. It's like the right energy. It's like when I'm working with musicians, it's like, it's not about the skill. It's about, can I have a drink with them? And do we have interesting ideas? So it's a lot to do with friendship as well, the collaborations and this trust and being able to be vulnerable with each other and to be able to tell each other that you don't like what's happening and like not get, feel personally. It's about the work being the right work in the end. And it was a really enjoyable time making the costume in London, and very natural process because, when you trust someone's aesthetic, you don't have to worry as much.
There are so many nice connections in the exhibition because it wasn't selected as a curated show, it's 2 solo shows, but there just happened to be these really lovely threads that run through, including textiles.
Literally.
And literally, Ona, the conversations you had with the factory girls in Derry ended up being something really special that fed into the film work that's in the show. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Well, so basically, Derry was run by shirt and pajama factories. Like, I don't know, some years ago, it was 70 factories around the town, and it was the leading industry in Europe and the Western world of shirt making. It's no longer there because all that moved to Asia, but the people who used to make it are still there. And as I am interested in how things are made, I was quite curious to meet them. And I think that it changed so much of my perception, like about a thing that's factory made, because you meet a person who is putting all the skill and love to it. And then I say, and what about the conditions, blah. And then they say, oh, we loved it there. Like it was the home and it was the place where we built community and where we shared skill. And it was quite precious and special. And they showed me some of the shirts they were making because they still have some stolen bits and taken bits and things. And, like the explanation of how a sleeve is made is totally, I don't know, like it's like a knowledge of civilization, like why the sleeve is made like this. And then you hear the whole very logical explanation about actually a human body. And I don't know, for me, it was really interesting to get to know some things that I use daily, but I don't know so much about it, and how the ladies were, skilled to do just one precise thing, like to sew a sleeve on, and how disappointed in the beginning they were because they said, we thought that we learned to make shirts, but we just know how to sew a collar or do a thing. But then, like it was quite interesting. I also found so much parallel in other skillfulness and also deskilling and things like that. What you do when you are been sewing collar of a shirt for 30 years and you still miss it daily, which is also something that was quite surprising to me. And now when Mark is talking about having a skill or not having a skill, that's also very interesting. Like, for example, with singing, I have no skill whatsoever, like deeply unskilled. I can't even clap to the rhythm. I tried to go to musical school and they were like, okay, maybe that's not the best idea. And a friend of mine just did a performance with unskilled singers singing in a nettle field, and not field, but like a nettle kind of garden in Paris, and I found it so liberating for a person who is non-skilled, in this kind of sense. So that's also interesting, how today we somehow being the skilled becomes a little bit of a value. Like you can look at things without this kind of pressure of making them in a proper learned way. But not only in arts, I guess, like in fashion too. So yeah.
I feel like that's almost like all you have out of art school is to be de-skilled in so many things.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Daily, what is it you have when you're out in the world? So.
Yeah.
It's kind of a bit of a crisis after you come out and you're realizing, what skill did I learn? But then it becomes something that is a power as well. But some people, don't find out that it actually is something they can use.
Yeah, probably use is also a complicated word.
Use is use is the good word for that.
Yeah, that's so true.
But then is it about emotion, with the people, making those textiles there, the shirts and that, or is it about the process and the time together and that community for that?
Yeah, and I also think this is how I see it, because I can't see it any other way. They were insanely highly skilled. They made the best shirts in the world at the time. And then you see those threads. It's insane how they managed it. Like my hands don't even go that way. I can't imagine, how to make this kind of neat, really narrow thread. Like, and then I'm trying to see it from a perspective of an unskilled person, how it was a community building, but everything actually was secondary, I think, because the conditions were harsh and people were forced to somehow connect together because they had like their fingers pierced weekly, like it was a bit different kind of, even like today it's hard, but then it was even worse. So I don't know, like I was so biased with the knowledge that I found there. It was so interesting. And I also thought, why is it interesting to me? Because I am privileged not to have it or not to participate and be this kind of unskilled artist fascinated by, by the labor or things like that, which is quite, natural order of the world. So it's still like, I think, this was the nicest research because it left me completely puzzled and with open-end questions. I don't have any answer to any of them.
Hrefna, with the fashion aspect to your work, has that given you a new relationship with people who work in the industries as usual?
When I started making the bag, I was actually working in a sewing workshop that was supposed to be for refugee women, to give them, to create employment for refugee women that are under-skilled in Belgium, because Belgium also used to have like a textile industry, and there's quite some fashion being made in Antwerp and around. And with this project, like I stepped in as someone who was supposed to manage it, but the project kind of failed. It didn't really take off. So I started to make the bag in that context. But yeah, like again, like Ona was saying, sewing work is hard work. Creating employment for refugee women is quite positive, but it's also an underpaid and hard work. So it was also like, it was a weird, we didn't know what to think about this thing after all. So that was one connection for sure, and it was interesting to be in that context. I feel like what I know of the fashion industry now is that it is in total crisis. I think the whole world is in crisis, but the fashion industry in particular is in crisis of what it is and how it can continue. And I think part of what comes out of that is a lot of people individually making their own small brands. And Instagram is something that allows for that to happen. And I find that quite exciting. So I follow a lot of young people around the world that are making their own thing. Like seeing value also in found objects and collaging them together in a similar way that like I am doing. I'm not saying that I invented this. So that's maybe like an exciting movement.
I think for sure. And from what I understand from your practice, the sort of past and the kind of blurring of factual past and some doses of fiction in there. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I mean, maybe like similar to what Mark was saying earlier, like I also gather a lot of like diary material, or I feel like I'm constantly like digesting something. Like I experience something and I'm digesting it and I'm trying to work it through text, like in this way of like explaining it to myself or like telling a story to a friend. Like sometimes I tell the same dinner story 5 times and then I'm like, wow, now I'm realizing this is actually very interesting, and I make, new connections. This can also like end up in my practice. So yeah, like I feel like the past, personal life, it's kind of like all mixes together. I don't have like a direct way of how I work with it, but I've just had these experiences. But I also I tend to put myself into situations that like maybe the people around me don't necessarily share with me. Like I went to business school in the pandemic, for an example, and then I feel the need to share that knowledge or share what I observed in those situations with the people around me. So like I was making stories on Instagram, and then I was invited to write a text, and then I was invited to read it. So sometimes, things kind of unravel in that way.
Ona, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about the tags that you sewed into your vinyl sculpture pieces.
Okay, so those tags, well, they also come from, it's probably secondhand store, but I found it in my friends and relatives' closets. It's the tags that have washed out so much that you don't really see the information anymore. In some you see that there were letters. So I was just thinking about, this kind of not knowingness and the curiosity around the objects that we have, because tags were not a very old habit of humans, because people knew what their items are made of, clothings, like cotton or wool or silk. It was basically free materials that people knew how to take care of them. But then when the rayon industry and this kind of blends of viscoses and these kind of natural and artificial materials started to mix, people didn't know anymore how to take care of them. Can I iron them? Can I wash them, etc., etc.? And this is how tags came in. So when I was thinking about the idea of veneers furniture, it's also that you don't really know what's inside. Like that's just the surface that's pretending to be solid wood, but then in the end you have this kind of meshed pulp of cheap woods inside, and you don't really know what is exactly there. So this is how my mind somehow connected these two, and I just liked to place this kind of letter of someone that you no longer can read. It also was funny how the tags washed out, but the clothings, you need quite some time to wash off the tag of 90s. So yeah, it took me quite some time to collect them.
You've participated in quite a few artist residencies over the years. Do you have a particular approach you take to them? Do you enjoy responding to the site? How much does it influence your practice?
Well, I don't know. To be honest, I'm also very skeptical somehow. It depends. For example, in Derry, it was wonderful because it was not actually an artist in residence establishment. So I lived in the city, and there were not, I wasn't living with other artists, basically just harassing the place in the bunch of foreigners, So I really had to blend in, and that was not blend in, but I had the approach of a normal person, which was amazing. And when you end up in these kind of artist colonies in some place, it's a bit strange to me. Of course, it's a wonderful opportunity, but I also feel it's a strange time. The time freezes somehow, you're no longer in the place where you normally are, and you have to keep everything suspended, and you go to a new place, and it's maybe it's just me, but I feel the pressure of somehow relate to the place, but the time is always too short, even if it's few months, it's quite impossible. So it's a strange thing. I like to do it sometimes. I like to be in this non-existent timeline somehow, but I also find it a bit complicated.
Is your practice generally studio based when you're in Vilnius, or are you out on site?
I have a studio, but to be honest, I hate sitting in the studio unless I really know what to do. I'm not the person who comes in the morning and starts. Best ideas for me come when I walk or I bike, or I do something that has this kind of change of scenery. And I remember in the art school, we were told that you need to be studio based. Like having a studio is the, not need, but like having a studio is like the biggest merit whatsoever. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not an artist. I can't be one. I'm like too restless. And but then we had like a visiting artist in the academy. It was Maria Loboda. And she said, oh, I hate being in a studio. Like I need to be out all the time. And I thought, okay, hello. So yeah, I mean, I think that having a studio is wonderful, but also thinking in terms of real estate, I would hate having to rent something, like because you have a living space and then another space, and you still have 24 hours in a day. So it's like, it's a bit complicated. I mean, maybe shared studio is an approach or something. I'm using my dad's studio, my dad's carpentry workshop. It's good, amazing, and all dusty, just the way I like it. So
it's really great that you've got access to that.
Yeah, other friends of mine do it differently. Like for example, there's one artist who is super studio based. So all people who know him are actually quite invited to come for like 2 weeks or a month when they need to make something. Because I think he also has a big space and he feels lonely. So which is also a nice way to do it.
Hrefna, do you have a particular relationship with studio spaces? And also, I'd love to ask you about gallery spaces, seeing as you're part of running one.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Ona said. I think it is financially becoming harder and harder to have a home and a studio, especially in bigger cities of Europe. I was living in Berlin before I moved to Brussels. I mean, Berlin has some great programs with like cheaper studios also. But like right now, how I'm doing it is that I have quite a large apartment. Brussels is relatively cheap. So I have kind of it's like all in one. It's a little bit crazy, but like the exhibition space that I run with my partner is in the apartment. My studio is in my apartment. We run a business. We photograph fairs and galleries, and that we do out of the apartment. So it's like kind of insanely like everything in one, like right now we're installing a show upstairs. So we've like emptied it out fully. And I've been like yesterday, I was just trying to find places for all the books and all the bookshelves. So I mean, I like this transformation about like in this home mixed space. We also have a garden. We have like 100 square meter garden with like 2 apple tree, 2 cherry trees, like pear tree. Like I have nothing to complain. So like I don't know if I'm meant to exist in this way. Like I often really need my own space and I have a hard time thinking when there's other people around. So that's why I found often residencies quite tricky, like because you're adjusting to a new place, you have all these strangers around and you are like getting to know them. And that is like just all this interaction and all these new things have like influence on you. So I find it hard to work. So now I'm just trying to adjust myself to this way of living where I kind of departmentalize my life a bit. So like this week is for install and for like talking to the artist and doing these things. Next week is for something else. I don't have to stress this week about not being able to have many thoughts on my own because they will be happening next week. So yeah, this is kind of how I try to departmentalize it. And my relationship to galleries or exhibition spaces, I mean, our space is like an artist-run space. We are like completely non-funded. We're doing everything on our own. We have sold work, but that happens very rarely. I try to, because the space is a home and a public space at the same time, I try to make it quite personal, not over personal, but I greet everyone at the door. I introduce myself to everyone. I try to have an overview in events of like, oh, these people should maybe talk. Oh, these, like, is everyone having a good time? I try to just host as well as I can. So, because I've so often been in gallery spaces, white cubes, like whatever, where that is just not the case. And many people feel very uncomfortable. And I think when these kind of social events take place in a gallery space / home, they should be done well.
How did you come up with the idea, like to make it in your home? Did you get a big apartment and you thought, okay, it's so lovely, let's do it?
Yeah, it's kind of like that. Yeah, so I've moved to Brussels in like the end of 2019 with my partner. And we had like thought of the idea of opening up an exhibition space. But then we found this apartment and like it has wooden panels and it has like ceiling paintings and 3 fireplaces. It's like insane, like I was like, oh my God, we can afford this. So it kind of like, it just invited itself to be an exhibition space. It was too good to be true somehow.
To be hidden.
Yeah, exactly. Like the doors need to be open.
Yeah. Sounds like that. And the pictures, I mean, they speak for themselves. Like you see immediately, this is like this classics Brussels place. And what is your relationship to the city? Because whenever I'm in Brussels, I feel like, okay, this is the middle of Europe.
Yeah.
Like this is the center somehow and a capital, but also it has such a village feel to it in a way. And I think this combination is really interesting. What do you feel about it?
Like, it is a very weird city. It's very, I mean, it's extremely mixed. Like in the neighborhood we live in, there are 173 nationalities. As an Icelander, I added like another one. Like it has, it's like super mixed, and it has this European kind of center in it that you're still kind of only aware of when you're there, or when Joe Biden appears and like all of a sudden all the metros are closed.
Yeah.
So it's like it's very like, it's very villagey, but then still like this center feeling. Like half of Belgium, all the Flemish people hate Brussels because they think it's so dirty, which is also a funny thing. A lot of things don't work well. It's like very dysfunctional, which is kind of still, I think, coming from Germany. Like, I like the chaos. Like my partner was like, hey, let's move to Switzerland. And I was like, no, hell no. I'm not moving from Germany to Switzerland. That's not a chance. So I kind of like the chaos of it. And people are so friendly, like the international community, like it's separated. Our communities are quite separate. There's the Flemish one, there's a Wallonian one, there's the people from Paris, and then there's international one. And you maybe don't have that much to do with the French-speaking one as an international one, unless you have direct connections to it. But the international community is so welcoming. Like I have, like in Berlin, I don't know how often I had to introduce myself again to the same people that I'd met 5 times. And I was like, here I am again, I am the tall Icelandic lady, we have spoken 20 times. No, but like, and here it was like, sorry, I'm just ranting, but here it was like, people were like, oh, wow, it's so great you're here, and you're opening a space that's so great. Like, I've never felt this welcome. And so it feels so good to add something new to the cultural scene when it feels appreciated.
Yeah.
It's a whole other thing than opening something up in an already over full city. You know what I mean? So
even though Brussels doesn't seem like it's very empty in that sense, so it's really nice to hear that still, like, even in a city as active artistically as Brussels, I don't know, maybe it's my impression of what I get from Brussels, but it seems like, I don't know, if from an artistic point of view, I think it's one of the best cities in Europe, if not the best, compared all the, and I was also wondering, I think maybe also this question can go to Mark, because as if you're running like an off space, an artist run space, how does it influence your practice, or vice versa? Like, do you need some different kind of approach to run other people's exhibitions, or is it actually not that far from, dealing with your own?
Like, I think, so I've been producing, like, a side job, like outside of like also performing, was in the last like 10 years, is that I've been producing things. I produced like an art and music festival in Iceland. So I felt like I had these 2 personalities. One was like a creative one, and one was like more a practical production one. And I found it hard to enter the creative one after like an intense production period. But now I'm trying to integrate these 2 sides of the brain into one, because you also have to be able to produce your own work. You have to be able to make them reach a finishing point. You can't just like be like, like in, even though it's great to be in a daydreamy, like whatever, like space, like constantly, you have to reach that point. So I think that's maybe like a little bit of a mind practice, maybe a grown-up approach.
Yeah, because Mark, you co-run a space, so is any of this feeling familiar to you? Or
yeah, like I run a space called Miniviog Arts, basically do public artworks, events, and site specific things in the public realm. And we've a project coming up in August to September. But yeah, I agree. It's a strange, weird thing of being like, you know, you make your own work and you have your own practice, and then your role changes to like, I suppose, facilitating ideas and trying to get, you know, make things happen. And I think maybe the true lived experience and collaborations, that obviously helps, you know, and understanding what it feels like to be in that position. And also all those things of working with galleries in the past on art shows of like, you know, listening to the artist, or, you know, asking questions, and also empathy, I think, is a major one, you know, having empathy for the position someone's in, and just being curious as well, as being an artist, curious about other artists, other mediums, as I would in my own practice, about new ideas. And it's the same when, you know, you're working with artists on the, you know, the space I co-run. I'm interested in ideas and people, and, you know, new materials, new stuff. So there's similarities, but I do, you know, trying to work it out sometimes it seems to me, separate parts of my self. You know, one is my practice, and I don't know if that changes, it gets more integrated, but like I wouldn't, you know, some people say it's their practice, you know, doing that part, but I do see them as different entities within myself. But, you know, maybe, yeah, we've, I don't know.
Because I agree with you with the dialogues. It's so great to be, I mean, that's also why you keep on doing it, because you're in an intimate dialogue with artists you've chosen to work with. So like that maybe also does have effect on your practice, because you like their work and them. So I really like that part.
Yeah, because I was curating few shows during like few years ago. I don't do it anymore, but for me it was the main, like, it was interesting to work with people who work with different stuff, because I already work with my own stuff, you know, so I don't get a chance to work with some other materials or performance or other kind of sound work. And it was really interesting to curate something else. But then I understood that at some point I need to decide one or another. For me, it was like that, but I quite admire when people can somehow continue on having this kind of multiplicity in their persona. I think it's impressive.
Yeah, but I will tell you, I will not do this forever.
Well, on that, we'll include links to all of the artist practices and also the spaces as well that comes along with this podcast. So I think we'll round up here. Thank you again to our artists, Ona Juciūtė, Mark Buckeridge, and Hrefna Hörn Leifsdóttir. You can see Mark and Ona's solo exhibition at CCA Derry Londonderry until the 2nd of July, and you can see documentation of the show in our archives at ccadld.org and on our socials at ccadld. To find out more about the artists, click the links in this episode's description. If you want to see more of the artist's work in the flesh, Hrefna is performing at Sistema in Marseille with Lena Magnaire on the 26th of August, and The Tale opens with Marina Pinsky and Beckett MVN on the 2nd of July. You can see Ona's work at the National Museum in Vilnius as part of the Difficult Pasts Connected Worlds exhibition on until the 28th of August 2022. And both Ona and Mark are part of Melorasia exhibition with Kaunas Artist House until the 21st of August. And thank you for listening.